So the omega-6 then, LA, linoleic acid, accumulates in our bodies. It accumulates in our body fat. And it's associated then with a pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient-deficient biological milieu. So that's what happens when you accumulate these fats, because the unsaturated fats are subject to oxidation.
Hi, and welcome to the Baby Let's Talk podcast. In this week's episode, I had the absolute pleasure of talking to none other than Dr. Chris Knobbe. Chris Knobbe is a physician, researcher, ophthalmologist, and associate clinical professor emeritus, formerly of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. And Dr. Knobbe believes that his most important role today is being a public health advocate. Dr. Knobbe is known primarily for his research, publications, and presentations connecting westernized diets to numerous chronic diseases, including coronary heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, autoimmune diseases, and age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. Now, Dr. Knobbe's research has focused greatly on vegetable oil or seed oil dangers and their unequaled contributions to westernized disease. In the field of ophthalmology, Dr. Knobbe is known for his revolutionary hypothesis and supportive research regarding the potentially blinding eye disease AMD. Knobbe's hypothesis holds that AMD is driven by processed, nutrient-deficient and toxic foods, of which seed oils are the most dangerous. Dr. Knobbe is the author of 2 books in the field of nutrition, the newest, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, published in 2023, and Ancestral Dietary Strategy to Prevent and Treat Macular Degeneration, published in 2016. Now, Dr. Knobbe is a founder and director of both Ancestral Health Foundation and Cure AMD Foundation, which are non-profit organizations with goals of treating and preventing chronic disease. And Dr. Knobbe's goals are altruistic and humanitarian, as he seeks to end preventable heart disease, cancer, blindness, and many other chronic diseases through the profoundly beneficial effects of ancestral dietary strategies. I really hope that you will enjoy this episode. There's a lot of information and so much knowledge that Dr. Chris Knobbe has. So on to the podcast. Enjoy this one. Welcome to the Baby Let's Talk podcast. My name is Ragna and I am your host. I am a medical doctor, a certified pre-postnatal trainer, and a mother of 4, and I help moms reclaim their health and reach their goals through the power of movement, nutrition, and overall healthy lifestyle. This podcast is born from my dedication to uncovering the truths about nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle that genuinely benefit our bodies. We'll explore how to establish a lasting, healthy lifestyle that fits the reality of motherhood, how to enjoy an active, pain-free pregnancy, and how to navigate postpartum recovery to regain your fitness in a wholesome way. Join me as we debunk myths and discover the paths to excess energy, body confidence, and loving the life you live as a mom. Hi, Chris, and thank you so much for coming onto my podcast. I'm truly honored to have you come as a guest to my show.
Hi, Ragna. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor and pleasure. It's neat to be with another ophthalmologist.
Yeah, it's like, what are the odds, right? When I heard that you were an ophthalmologist or read it, I was so, I was even more interested in reading all of your work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've been following your work for quite some time now. So when I first reached out to you, I was really glad and excited that you wanted to come onto my show. And you know what, that you are the very first guest on my show. And it's like, wow, where do I go from here? I get you as my first guest, so I'm honored.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, for me, it's this is the first time I've been on a podcast with another ophthalmologist too.
Yeah.
I think we've ever had another. Yeah, I've never been on a podcast with an ophthalmologist. So a lot of ophthalmologists that I work with, obviously, in my work. Yeah, but never been on a podcast with any. So this is great.
Thank you. But for those who do not know your background, could you just introduce yourself, just your background a little bit more, and tell us about what you're passionate about and what you fill your time with now?
Yeah, sure, Ragna. So my name is Chris Knobbe. I'm a physician and specialized in ophthalmology, but I left practice 9 years ago, back in 2015, to pursue nutrition research, and this was really born out of my own suffering. I began my interest in nutrition really didn't start until 2011, which was 21 years after I'd graduated from medical school. So I didn't know a thing about nutrition until then, but I got really interested because a partial paleo diet had helped my arthritis so immensely. So I'd suffered with arthritis at that point for like 17 years.
Wow.
And so I changed my diet a little bit and had this huge improvement, and it was just changed my life. And so that was what the impetus was for my pursuing nutrition. And a long story short is that, about 4 years later, I was quite convinced that processed foods, and particularly vegetable oils, might be driving age-related macular degeneration, AMD, the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide, that I left practice to pursue that very question and that research. And basically I've never looked back. But in the last 5 or 6 years, my research has really been much more broad. So I've worked on the connection between mostly processed foods and vegetable oils as drivers of obesity and chronic disease. And chronic disease means almost all the conditions that we're so familiar with, like coronary heart disease, stroke, cancers, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, macular degeneration, autoimmune diseases, and the list goes on. So that's kind of where I've been, over the last 5 or 6 years, is mostly focused on the really broad, big picture.
Yeah. So you touched on that a little bit here. So I think, that everyone agrees that we humans have become much more unhealthy in the last 100 to 120 years. But the answer, or the reason, seems to be maybe difficult to find, or what is it that has happened these past 120 years that caused this? But we've got some compelling evidence on emerging in the past decades on that, like you said, vegetable oils or seed oils, that this consumption of these oils may be the reason for this dramatic increase in chronic disease development. So what can you tell me about this? What have you found in your research regarding this?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. So this is, I'm going to bring in here the slide, and can you see that okay?
Yes, I can see that. Here, I'm going to do.
Yeah, this is what I want to go to based on your question right now. So a lot of people don't realize that most of our chronic diseases were once incredibly rare. So for example, here we are with coronary heart disease, and this is global. So this would include your area, Europe or Norway or the whole world. But anyways, in the 19th century, 1800 and 1900, there's only 8 papers on coronary heart disease, 8 for the entire century. So physicians were aware of what coronary heart disease was, but they just said almost no one had ever seen a case. And by 1912, James Herrick published the first documented case of myocardial infarction or heart attack in the United States. So really, this was, and there's so much evidence behind this, but I'm just going to make this quick. So then by the 1930s, coronary heart disease became the leading cause of death in the U.S. was virtually unknown 20 years earlier, right? And so something's going on there. Then by 2010, you can see that almost 1 in 3 people, 32% of Americans, are dying of coronary heart disease, a disease that really didn't exist 100 years before. So here is cancer deaths, and this is in the United States, and you can see that in 1811, 200 years ago roughly, 1 in 188 people died of cancer in the US. That's about 0.5%. 90 years later, roughly in 1900, 1 in 17 people were dying of cancer. That's 5.6%, I believe, is the number. And then 2010, it's almost 1 in 3 in the United States dying of cancer. I think it's 31.2%. So that's a 62-fold increase in cancer deaths in 200 years. And it's not because we're living longer. And I don't have the evidence to go through that right here, but we can talk about that later if you want to.
Yeah.
And here's diabetes. So, and this is in the United States also. I apologize that so much of this evidence comes from the United States, but the United States does have we have the best data in the entire world that goes clear back into the 19th century. And well, by the way, we're the sickest. We're the sickest developed nation in the world today. But anyway, here's diabetes. 1890 affected 0.0028% of the population. That's about 1 in 36,000 people. And then you can see it increased to 0.37% by 1935. You may not think that's a lot, but that's a 132-fold increase. So there's something going on. This trend continues. You can see we're at 0.91% by 1960, 2.97% by 1991, 6.95% by 2010, and 13% in 2016. So we're probably higher than that today.
Yeah.
But this is just between 1890 and 2016, a 4,643-fold increase in diabetes. And if diabetes had doubled, that would be statistically significant. And it went up 4,643-fold. And in the United States, as of 2016 or 18, one of those, 51% of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
51%, and 93% are metabolically unhealthy. So here's age-related macular degeneration, AMD, and this is kind of where a lot of my research started more than a decade ago. But you can see between 1851 and 1930, there was less than 50 cases of AMD in all of the world's literature. By 2020, 196 million, and we're on target to be 288 million by 2040. So this disease also went from extreme rarity to just commonality. It's just practically a household name in the United States. Here's Alzheimer's and dementia. So you can see the first case documented by physician and psychiatrist Alois Alzheimer back in 1908. I think there was 4 cases in 1910. You can see there was 150 cases worldwide in 1948. 2023, 55 million cases worldwide, and now there's 10 million new cases per year, and that's 1 new case every 3 seconds. Wow. So here's obesity, and many people don't realize that even in the United States, which has the highest obesity of any developed nation in the world today, back in the 19th century, in men age 18 to 80, obesity was 1.2%. That comes from Scott Allen Carson's work. He analyzed, in the last several decades of the 19th century, he analyzed prisoners that were in Texas and Nebraska and I think one other state, but he got data from those, and so that's how low obesity was. So Americans think we were really lean and fit and perfectly healthy in 1960, but that's when obesity was 13%.
Yeah.
And that's an 11-fold increase from 1890, right? And so it didn't change very much from 1960 to 1980. It was 14% in 1980. You can see this trend goes up and up. 1999, we're at 30.5% obesity. 2015, 39.8, 2018, 42.5% obesity, and another 31.4%, I think it is, overweight. So Americans, 74% either overweight or obese as of 2018. But anyway, the obesity alone, already between 1900 and 2018, that's a 35-fold increase in 118 years. That's 3,400% increase. Yeah. And so my work involves mostly connecting processed foods and vegetable oils to all of this. And we published this graph, not with all these these pop-ups on here, but we published this graph back in 2017 in the journal Medical Hypotheses. This is total vegetable oil consumption in the United States. And you can see that in 1865, we had 0 vegetable oils. All we would have had was a trivial amount of olive oil. The average person, probably 90% of the population, had never had olive oil up through 1865, right? And but anyway, no vegetable oil. So cottonseed oil was introduced right after the American Civil War. So again, about 1866. And then you can see that there's this blip here at 1909. This is when soybean oil was introduced, and then we just had all these other oils: soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. All of these oils are new to our diet. And by 2010, we're at 80 grams per person per day. And 80 grams is 720 calories. That's 32% of U.S. caloric intake.
Yeah.
This is the amount of oil that reaches the consumer. So this data comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or the FAO. So this data is not corrected for losses at the plate level, but it's corrected. So this is what actually gets to the consumer. So this means, the reason I'm pointing that out is we're not actually, on average, all of us consuming exactly 32% of our diet as vegetable oil, but roughly a fourth of the diet or more is probably coming from vegetable oils in the United States. And again, these are oils that didn't exist 145 years previously, right? They were 0. Another way of looking at this is in 1900, back when we were lean and fit and healthy, and there was no heart attacks, and cancer was very low, and diabetes was practically unknown. 99% of our added fats came from animal fat. And by 2005, 86% of added fats came from vegetable oils. So the vegetable oils, in terms of the added fats to the diet, almost completely supplanted and replaced vegetable oils.
Yeah. It's amazing when you look at all of these numbers. You kind of, initially you find it hard to believe, but in regards to processed foods, the main ingredients that people and studies have pointed out as being problematic about these foods are, seed oils, refined sugar, and refined carbohydrates. And especially the refined sugar and seed oils are probably the most important factors here. And I feel like whenever people are talking about processed foods, they're mostly always focusing only or much more on sugar and pointing at sugar being the main culprit. And I don't feel like there's much talk about seed oils in the general public, especially here in Europe. I feel like the seed oil discussions have come a little bit further in the US, but in your observational epidemiology research, what have you found on this? That is the pattern of sugar consumption, carbohydrate consumption, and then compared with seed oil consumption in correlation with chronic disease.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's this is the same mantra that's being that's being promoted so strongly here, is that it's the problem in our diets is mostly carbohydrate in general and sugar.
Yeah.
So almost all of the nutrition camps today, they're bent on low carbohydrate diets. It's all about low carbohydrate diets, and you're right. It's even in the United States, where it's the most important. The talk is mostly about sugar and carbohydrates being the villain, and I don't really find that at all. This is where my work has led us. So I pulled up this graph, and you can see this is the sugar consumption in the United States, for those who can see this. And this goes back clear to 1822. This data going back this far comes from Stefan Guillenet, PhD, who's a friend of mine, and he published this data quite a long time ago, but we actually uncovered the same data, and we published it back in 2017, but we only had data going back to 1840. But you can see that, so in 1822, we only consumed, I think it was roughly 40 calories of sugar per person per day. And you can see that over here at the end of the curve in 2016, we were consuming 526 calories. But what I want you to notice is that most all of this increase in the sugar consumption had already taken place by 1922. I'll show this in another graph, Ragna. You can see that. So here in 1890, when obesity was 1.2%, our sugar consumption was already 211 calories per day. That's per person per day. So that's 10.8% of calories. Now that the World Health Organization tells us today we should not be consuming more than 10% of our calories as sugar, and they recommend it should be, even for more health benefits, drop it to 5% or less. But look at this. Americans were consuming 10.8% of their calories as sugar in 1890. Yet again, we had no obesity, no coronary heart disease, cancer rates very low, diabetes effectively almost unknown. There were 1,700 people in the entire United States with diabetes in 1890, and the population was 63 million people. Anyway, so you can see here that the sugar consumption reaches 499 calories in 1930. This is when obesity was about 3 or 4%. So we have to guess at this number. This is interpolated data because we have data in 1900, and then the next data is in 1961. So this is an interpolated data. So it's an estimate. Yeah. But anyway, you can see that if we go to the end of the graph here, that sugar consumption is 526 calories in 2016. Well, that's only 27 calories more than it was in 1930. Yeah. Yeah, obesity has climbed from about 3 or 4% in 1930 to 42.5%, and all of the other, chronic diseases have gone through the roof, right? Yeah. And so here, now we'll just plug in, this is vegetable oils, and you've already looked at this before, but you can see that there's an incredible correlation here between the vegetable oil consumption and obesity in the United States. And here I'll just show the two together. So hopefully people looking at this can see that there's really a striking correlation between between vegetable oils and obesity, and almost no correlation to sugar. Now I want to just show you this right here. So we're just looking at part of that graph, Ragna. We're looking at just 1922 to 1987 in this graph. Yeah. And you can see the sugar consumption here in the green and the vegetable oil consumption in the blue versus obesity. So let me give the numbers. So sugar consumption in 1922, 473 calories. You can see it's flat all the way to 1987. It's 497 calories. So it's 24 calories more in 1987 than it was in 1922. But look at the vegetable oil, 78 calories in 1922, 550 calories in 1987. And obesity rose from 2.95% to 18.6%. So we'll put all this together. So 1922 to 1987, sugar increased 5%, vegetable oils increased 605%, obesity increased 6.3-fold or 532%. And, this is 65-year period of time. So for sugar theorists, how would they explain this? Because there's no correlation here at all between sugar and obesity, right? Sugar virtually did not change, and yet obesity went up 6.3-fold.
Yeah. Yeah, this is striking.
Yeah. And then here, I'll just show one more to help get at this sugar evidence. So this is, again, in the United States. And you can see that from 1999, obesity was 30.5%. It climbed to 42.5% by 2018. But look at the sugar trend. It's going down.
Yeah, it's going down.
Declining, and the vegetable oils are going up. So sugar is falling after 2004 while obesity goes through the roof. And it's the same situation for diabetes. That we've got this. In fact, we have data now and evidence in 5 countries where you see the sugar consumption going down while we see the obesity and diabetes going way up. And those 5 countries are the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and Israel. And I'm sure there's more, but that's how many we have so far. And some of those, the sugar consumption has been going down for decades, like in Australia and the United Kingdom. It's been going down for decades, and while obesity is going up. So again, it's just, the most important consideration of all in determining causation for a condition is the correlation.
Yeah.
So Bradford Hill criteria, he set forth 9 criteria to establish causation, and number 1 criteria was strength of association. And strength of association is another way of saying correlation. And in statistics kind of speak, that is the correlation coefficient. So you can put a number to that. And anyway, the point is that we don't have correlation with sugar consumption here. We have the correlation with vegetable oil consumption.
Yeah, and I think it's really striking when I read, the results that you have on, for example, the Japanese population, because another thing that's often pointed out as probably being a contributing factor to the increase in chronic disease is that we simply just eat much more food now than we do before. That is, we eat a lot more calories now than before. But do you have any evidence on that? Was that something that you saw for the Japanese people, for example?
I don't have the graphs here, but for Japan handy. But I can talk about that.
If you would just explain that shortly, because I remember when I heard you talk about this first, and I read it, then I found this just so striking, hearing all of these facts from you.
Yeah, and the evidence in Japan is really probably the most powerful of all. I always say Japan's the quintessential nation to illustrate these points, because back in 1960, well, everybody knows, first of all, going back 2,000 years, the Japanese diet has mostly been white. Well, I don't know if the consumption of white rice goes back quite this far, but their food consumption is mostly based on white rice, fish, and vegetables. And in Okinawa, it's pork, white rice, and vegetables. But in the 1950s to up to 1960, the Japanese diet, whether in mainland Japan or in Okinawa, is 84% carbohydrate. And that's mostly, in mainland Japan, that's mostly white rice. And in Okinawa, it's white rice. Again, the difference being they consume a lot more fish in Japan, in mainland Japan, a lot more pork in Okinawa. But 84% carbohydrate in Japan, and their fat consumption was 5%. And from 1960 until about somewhere between 2004 and 2010, their carbohydrate consumption dropped from 84% to 56%, I believe is the number. It's either 56 or 58%. Their total calories declined almost a third during that time, from I think around 2,900 calories down to closer to 1,900, if I remember right. But their total calories were on the decline. Sugar did increase from 1960 to 1991, I believe, and then was on the decline. So, but during that time, obesity in the men doubled. Breast cancer in women increased fivefold. Age-related macular degeneration increased 82-fold, from 0.02% to 13.4%, I think is the number, or maybe that number is not quite right, but it increased 82-fold during this period. And their diabetes increased, I think it was 345-fold, right? So all of these things, obesity, diabetes, macular degeneration, and cancer, all rising exponentially, while their calories went down, carbohydrates went down, sugar went down. But the one thing going up was vegetable oils. Their vegetable oils increased from 9 grams per person per day in 1961 to 39 grams per person per day in 2004. That's a 4.5-fold increase.
Yeah.
So that's the answer right there. That's why you can see their every facet of their health has been on the decline over the past 5 or 6 decades. Every single facet, and it's correlated strongly to westernization of the diet, mostly in the form of seed oils.
Yeah. And I read about this a little bit. You talked about this a little bit in your book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, that one argument that we hear all the time when we're talking about epidemiology of chronic disease and age-related diseases is that, we are living longer now. So doesn't that explain the increase in these chronic diseases? But, doesn't low life expectancy in the 19th and early 20th century account for low chronic disease prevalence? And that's why it's going up now. Or, I kind of know that that's not the reason for this increase. But could you explain this a little bit for our audience?
Yes, absolutely. So this kind of thinking is just because of lack of understanding of what the life expectancy at birth really means. Because if you go back to, like in the United States, in 1900, the life expectancy was 47 or 48 years, I think. So many people mistakenly believe that, so we're all just suddenly becoming old and dying at around age 50. And that's not true for any population on Earth in all of history. There's never been a population where people became, quote, elderly and died in their 40s or even in their 50s. So the primary reason that the life expectancy at birth, the LEB, was so low is because of childhood mortality in history has always been so high, and it's still very, very high in hunter-gatherer populations. So I'll give the numbers. So in 1800, 43.3% of the world's children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Yeah. In 1900, it wasn't much better. 36.2% of children did not live to see their 5th birthday. And in 1900 in the United States, about 4% of women died in childbirth. So you can see right there that this brings the life expectancy at birth way down. So I always say, so if a husband, and wife have one child, if the husband lives to age 80 years and the wife to 70, and their only child dies in infancy before age 1, so the total there's 150 years of life, right? But they divide by 3, and now you've got a life expectancy at birth of 50.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it was for most of the world. So like in the United States in 1900, the typical family had 6 or 7 children, and they could expect to lose 2 of those children before age 5. They primarily died of infectious disease. And that's been reduced dramatically just by clean, potable water, by sewer systems and good septic systems, and then medical care. Just even things like a simple antibiotic or IV fluids save the lives of many, many, many children. So that's what the difference is. So people who survive childhood have almost always lived in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s throughout history. And you can see this wherever you look. There's substantial evidence. Like, for example, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the United Kingdom has really good numbers on this. And you can see that even back in 1890 and 1911, for example, in those years, that I think it was like 70% of their population was still alive after age 50, and something like 30% still alive after age 80. Mm-hmm. I'm just I'm approximating those numbers, but so that's what's common, throughout the world. In hunter-gatherer populations, even today, this situation is similar. So Gervin and Kaplan researchers established that the modal or most common age of death for hunter-gatherers is 72. If they live past age 15.
Yeah.
So if they survive childhood, then they're most likely to live into their 70s.
Yeah.
And again, these are people who live outdoors in the most brutal circumstances, right? And they still survive into their 70s typically, if they can survive childhood.
Yeah. But regarding this populations, these ancestrally living populations, do they have these chronic diseases like we do, and why, how is their diet different from ours?
Right. No, they don't. That's what's, interesting. And, Weston A. Price, Lauren Cordain, all kinds of researchers have made these observations in hunter-gatherer type populations that in general, they don't have chronic disease. First of all, they don't have obesity. It just virtually does not exist. They don't have any appreciable coronary heart disease. Cancer is, rare, and in some populations unknown. Diabetes is virtually unknown in these populations. So if they don't have diabetes, they don't have metabolic syndrome, they don't have Alzheimer's or dementia. Macular degeneration, well, that's on the agenda for me to research, because no one has ever looked, has examined the retinas of these populations except for one, and that was the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta back in the 1970s. And professors Sinnott and White studied that population. They lived off of almost entirely sweet potatoes. Their diet was 93.4%, I believe, carbohydrate. It was around 3% fat and 2.4% protein. Those numbers are approximates. And yet they had no obesity, no diabetes, there was no mention of coronary heart disease. Cancer was a rarity. But they looked in their retinas, in 345 of them. None of them had any macular degeneration. None. And so, this is what you find in these populations. And the one, if you look at all of them, all of these hunter-gatherers collectively, what they don't have is processed foods. And processed foods are really primarily just made up of three things: refined flour, refined sugar, and vegetable oils. And you can throw trans fats in there, industrially produced trans fats, but the trans fats come from vegetable oils, and they're in vegetable oils. So if you remove vegetable oils, you don't have industrially produced trans fats. You just have the naturally occurring trans fats. So again, that's what they don't have. So the hunter-gatherers have a very, very low omega-6 consumption because they don't have vegetable oils.
Yeah. Yeah, so what is it exactly about vegetable oils or seed oils that is so bad for our health? What is it about them that is so detrimental and leads to these diseases?
Yeah, great question, Ragna. It's the four things. I say there's four pillars of hazard that come with vegetable oils. And it's that, first of all, the vegetable oils are very, very high in omega-6 fatty acids. Primarily just one, omega-6 linoleic acid, or LA. It's the 18-carbon omega-6 fat that accounts for 90+% of the fat or fatty acid in any natural fat. And so, again, that's just the omega-6 portion of it. Right, so natural fats would be made up of saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. And the polyunsaturated fats are omega-6 and omega-3, and omega-6 is the bulk of that in vegetable oils. And so the omega-6 then, linoleic acid, accumulates in our bodies. It accumulates in our body fat, and it's associated then with a pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient-deficient biological milieu. So that's what happens when you accumulate these fats, because the unsaturated fats are subject to oxidation. And of all of these four pillars, I say oxidation is by far and away the worst problem. So this is kind of like we're rusting inside. And we can get into a little bit more detail. You want to.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's, for me, and probably for a lot of my listeners, that's how you really understand, what is good for your health and what is not. Because, when you know it in detail, you understand the processes, then you're more likely to, make choices that are really good for your health and support your health. So please get provide us with some details here.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So when we consume seed oils, the omega-6 linoleic acid accumulates in our body fat, and it does rise in various tissues like our liver, brain, muscles, but not very much in those. But it sets up this environment, as I said, that's very pro-oxidative. So what that means, for example, is that in the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, the linoleic acid, a diet high in linoleic acid ultimately damages a molecule called cardiolipin. And that cardiolipin is a molecule inside the inner mitochondrial membrane. And when that cardiolipin becomes oxidized because it contains linoleic acid, which is what happens. So the linoleic acid in that molecule oxidizes, it changes its shape, and it may be replaced by other fatty acids, which causes this conformational shape change in the molecule. And then the molecules then can, in the inner mitochondrial membrane, can become porous. Well, the problem with that is that inside the inner mitochondria, is the way that our body produces energy is it produces a hydrogen proton gradient. So you build this gradient, and it uses those hydrogen protons to protonate adenosine diphosphate to adenosine triphosphate, ADP to ATP. And that happens because these protons move through the inner mitochondrial membrane and through ATP synthase. And this is what produces energy. But if that membrane becomes leaky, which is what happens in a high omega-6 like seed oil diet, you lose the power of that proton gradient. That proton gradient just leaks away, essentially. This is one method by which high seed oil diets damage the mitochondria. So the mitochondria, then we lose power, and at the same time, this increases reactive oxygen species, and which is that adds to the inflammatory component of what's going on metabolically. And when the reactive oxygen species increase, the very next thing that happens is that the cell becomes insulin resistant. So that means the cell stops responding to insulin. And I believe this is essentially because the cell is becoming sick. And so the cell just puts up stop signs, says, hey, I'm sick. I'm sick in bed, and I can no longer process food properly. So don't send in any more sugar or fats because I'm here in bed sick. And so it puts up the stop signs, and what that does is it prevents insulin from causing the cell to take up more food stuff. And so I always say the cell is the microcosm of the whole body. So if the cell becomes insulin resistant, then the whole body is becoming insulin resistant, right? And then what happens is your your blood sugars start to rise, and you're at the same time becoming, progressively less healthy. You're headed towards metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, fatty liver disease, and diabetes. Ultimately, that's sort of the progression to go through. And so this cannot be properly explained with high sugar diets, and even when they do, the high sugar diets that have been used in animal studies, they don't at all resemble anything that ever happens in humans. Like they're using sugar diets of 60% sugar or 60% fructose. And Americans consume the highest amount of both vegetable oils and sugar of any nation in the world per capita, and we're consuming 21% sugar as of 2010. But if you put laboratory animals on diets that resemble what Americans are doing with their seed oils, which is about a fourth of the diet as seed oils, or 11.8% omega-6 linoleic acid. That's where we were in 2008. These animals get sick. They rapidly become obese. They develop fatty liver disease. They develop non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, metabolic syndrome, and they become diabetic. So they become obese and diabetic, and this happens within a few weeks to up to 8 months. They'll become morbidly obese and with only one thing changed between, like one difference is that their omega-6 consumption or seed oil consumption is much higher. So they don't need more calories.
No,
they
exactly.
need seed oils.
Yeah. And just a little recap for our audience here on, because I hear this all the time, people confuse a little bit omega-6 and seed oils and all that. So when we're talking about fatty acids, so we have saturated fatty acids and then monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs like they're often called. And they're categorized like this because, of their chemical structure, right? Because these saturated fatty acids, they're fully saturated with hydrogen atoms. These carbon chains are fully saturated with hydrogen atoms. There are no double bonds between them, so they're tightly packaged and chemically more stable. And this is known in the literature that polyunsaturated fatty acids are chemically more unstable. We cannot argue against that because they have, in monounsaturated fatty acids, they have one double bond, and then polyunsaturated have 2 or more double bonds in their chains. And this provides, so there's double bonds between some of the carbon atoms. So it kind of, you can think about it like this: there's an empty seat at each carbon atom for another atom to come in, break up the double bond, and sit there. So they are chemically more unstable, right? So for PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, then we have different types of PUFAs. We have, for example, omega-3 and omega-6, or linoleic acid. And sometimes when I'm entering discussions about polyunsaturated fatty acids, people confuse the numbers of PUFAs in general ingested, or vegetable oils ingested, because vegetable oils are not fully or 100% PUFAs. And then, so can you break this a little bit down for us? Vegetable oils, how much polyunsaturated fatty acids are in vegetable oils, or more importantly, maybe how much omega-6 or linoleic acid is in vegetable oils?
Yeah, perfect question. So the vegetable oil, the industrial seed oils, I'll call them, they run the gamut from about 20% omega-6 linoleic acid, or LA, in canola oil, up to a high of 78% omega-6 linoleic acid in safflower oil. The most consumed oil in the United States is soybean oil, and it's about 56% omega-6 linoleic acid. So you can see that's where these vegetable oils run. I get from about 20% omega-6 LA to 78%. But let me contrast that to natural animal fats. So butter, lard, and beef tallow that are all naturally raised, so in other words, this would be like cattle on grass, and pigs, or even chickens that are fed their natural diet, which means they're not fed corn and soy. All of them are going to have omega-6 LA of about 1.5 to 2.5% roughly. So that's how low the omega-6 should be. And I've looked at all these different populations, that, like the hunter-gatherers, and the bulk of them, their omega-6 linoleic acid consumption is under 2% of their total calories. If you look at, so Americans, we modeled the diet in Americans in 1865 when we had 0 vegetable oils, and the omega-6 LA consumption was about 2.2 to 2.6 grams, about 2.4 grams on average, or 1.1% of calories. Now that doubled by 1909. It was up about 7-fold by 1999, and it was up 11-fold by 2008. So it was at 29 grams of omega-6 LA per day. So we went from about 2.4 grams to 29 grams, and in percentage of our diet, 1.1% in 1865 to 11.8% of the diet, right? So that's an 11-fold increase, or 1,000% increase in omega-6 linoleic acid during that time, 1865 to 2008. So that's that's a big part of the inherent problem. And that's, that's not the only part of it, but that's a major part of it.
Yeah. So how much linoleic acid have you found out in your research, that you said now we are getting, you talked about how much we're getting in with our diet right now, up to 11.8% of our total daily calories, right? Yeah. Right. So how much should we be aiming for? How much should we be consuming in a day, and why?
Yeah, we should be under 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. And we, it's not hard. If you just eliminate vegetable oils and you just do that alone, just eliminate vegetable oils, and you will move greatly towards an ancestral level. And that's the main thing. We need to discuss, which vegetable oils again, but that's the main thing right there. And I do think it's important, not nearly as critically important, but I think it may be important to keep your omega-6 lower as well by avoiding the animals that are consuming high omega-6 diets themselves. And that would only be like chicken and pigs, because they're, in factory farming, as they call it, they're fed corn and soy. In the United States, they get GMO corn and soy. So it's a good idea to try to avoid those if possible, or just mostly, keep the fat from those animals low. But it's not an issue with beef. With cattle or ruminants, they have a multi-compartment stomach. And one of those stomachs is what I call a biohydrogenation chamber. So they're able to take omega-6, even if cattle eat vegetable oil, high omega-6 diets, or corn and soy, it doesn't matter what you feed them, they will hydrogenate the omega-6 into saturated and monounsaturated fats, and that's what they'll store in their body fat, and that's what they'll put out in their milk. So cattle, doesn't matter what they're fed, their omega-6 is going to be very low. Like, for example, that a cow fed 100% grass, for its entire life would have around 2, maybe 3% of its fatty acids as omega-6 linoleic acid, whereas the grain-finished cattle, they're fed, grain here in the United States for the last maybe 4 months of their life or so to fatten them up. And even their omega-6 linoleic acid is still only maybe, 3% to 4%. So it's still very, very low as compared to seed oils, right?
Yeah.
So let me, if you don't mind, Ragna, let me just mention too, since we're on the subject, because people always say, what do I cook with? What oils are okay? Well, so let me just address that real quick while we're here discussing omega-6 linoleic acid, because I do think it's important. So again, the industrial seed oil, of all the vegetable oils, I break them up into industrial seed oils, food oils, and tropical oils is the way I look at them. And you can categorize them in different ways, but the industrial seed oils that are high in omega-6 and the really dangerous ones, again, would be like corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, maybe peanut and sesame. I say maybe because peanut and sesame oils they don't need much process. They can just be pressed, and you can have a decent oil out of that. So they're moderately high in omega-6, like in the 30-some% omega-6, but they're not processed necessarily. So anyway, then you have let's call them the food oils, and that would be like olive oil and avocado oil. Olive oil is around 10% omega-6 LA, but it runs the gamut from around 3% to up to 27%, I believe, omega-6 LA. That's olive oil. Avocado oil is around 14 or 15% LA. Yeah. You have the tropical oils those are coconut, palm, and palm kernel. And coconut and palm kernel, they're both about 2% omega-6 LA.
Yeah.
And palm oil is about 10% LA. But palm oil requires heating and processing that coconut oil and palm kernel oil don't.
Yeah.
So I don't think palm oil is all that healthy of an oil. It has significant advanced lipid oxidation end products, and palm kernel oil and coconut oil do not. So just to get to like, what's the take home message?
Yeah.
So I just say cook everything in butter. Everything. Yeah. Don't cook with olive oil. If you want to use olive oil and you know that it's fresh, it's authentic, it's not adulterated, you're absolutely sure of that. Yeah, I think olive oil can be fine, but I wouldn't cook with it because it can oxidize. If you need lots of oil, I would say use coconut oil. If you don't want the flavor of the coconut, you can use refined coconut oil. So they just steam it, and that removes the flavor. But it won't have advanced lipid oxidation end products to any significant degree.
Yeah.
Let's say there's only two fats that you need to add to your diet, and that would be, for the most part, I'd say butter and coconut oil. That's the simplest thing to do.
Yeah, right. But what is, in butter, what's the LA content or linoleic acid content in?
Yeah, it's like 1.5%.
Yeah. And then coconut was about 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you touched on this a little bit here with lipid. What did you call it? Advanced lipid oxidation end products. So what is that for our listeners? Because I know some of my listeners they know of this and they're doing their own research a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about this? What is it and why? How do these products? How are they processed, or is it breakdown products from the oxidation of linoleic acid, and are they not healthy? Is that what's so bad about linoleic acid?
Yes, that is the primary problem. So linoleic acid itself, first of all, is an essential fatty acid. We must have it, but it's present in all fat. And in things that you wouldn't think even had any fat, like white rice or oranges or potatoes. There's fat in all these foods, and they have tiny amounts of these essential fatty acids, omega-6 linoleic acid and omega-3 alpha linolenic acid, and that's ALA. So linoleic acid is not problematic until it oxidizes. But particularly when you heat the seed oils, they are going to break down they're going to oxidize, and that means they're going to break down into these metabolic end products called advanced lipid oxidation end products, so ALs, or lipid oxidation products, or LOPs, LOPS. And those oxidation products are chemicals like 4-hydroxynonenal, 4-HNE, malondialdehyde, MDA, carboxyethylpyrrole, acrolein, 9 and 13-HODE, which is hydroxyoctadecadienoic acid. I don't like to say that, but that's what it is. And then there's literally hundreds of others that don't have names. They just have chemical formulas, chemical names, right? Yeah. And that we don't know by sort of a more normal kind of name. But these lipid oxidation products, like 4-HNE, malondialdehyde, carboxyethylpyrole, acrolein, they are collectively cytotoxic, genotoxic, mutagenic, carcinogenic, atherogenic, thrombogenic, meaning they produce clots, diabeticgenic, meaning they're producing diabetes, and obesogenic, meaning they're producing obesity. And that's just putting them all together. That's what we're getting And this alone could be the single most important reason that the vegetable oils are so dangerous, is because of these products. It probably is mostly that. So you can get them when you heat the vegetable oil. That's the worst case scenario. And heated and reheated, or long-term heated vegetable oils, like they do in restaurants, particularly fast food restaurants, where they might keep cooking oil for a week, and just heated constantly, and they're continually frying French fries, or what we call French fries, in that oil. And those oils then will produce very high levels of these dangerous ALs or LOPs.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem with these.
Yeah. So these advanced lipid oxidation end products, they are they are produced in the processing of when we're making these seed oils, because they need to be heated, right? And then, so they're in the oils that we buy in the stores.
Yeah.
And then when we heat it on the pan, or, heat and reheat in restaurants, we're getting more and more of these dangerous advanced lipid oxidation end products, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And does that happen in our body as well? So when we get linoleic acid into our body, do these compounds, are they produced in our body as well?
Yes, and I don't know to what degree they are, but they are produced in our body. So I think this is a reason that higher omega-6 diets could be problematic. And I say could be because so far there hasn't been a way to really separate out vegetable oils from just high omega-6 diets. I don't know that we have a perfect answer to that. We don't have a good answer to that yet, because it's kind of like, trying to separate out what's going on with cigarette smoke. Why is it so dangerous? Because there's over 6,000 chemicals produced when you burn tobacco, right? And it's similar when you heat vegetable oils. They produce hundreds of these advanced lipid oxidation end products. And, are we producing a lot of these just from the high omega-6 diet, or is that we're consuming them already present in the oils, or is it both? And I think it's both. But of the two, I think it's far and away that the advanced lipid oxidation end products are already there in the oil, because of its processing, or because of its heating. And I think this goes back to why is it that the oils that haven't been processed so much, like sesame oil and peanut oil, they have a pretty good track record in Asia of being used and people still remaining healthy. I mean, reasonably good track record, a lot better than the countries like the United States and United Kingdom that use so much oil, and Israel that use lots of oil, and the oils that are heated. So I think it's just so simple, really. I'm not saying it's not easy to do, but it's simple to get these oils out of your life, but you have to prepare your own food.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. Yeah. So since we're on the topic of advanced lipid oxidation end products, you mentioned acrolein, and I remember I've seen a photo of a little boy or two little boys side by side. Could you explain this a little bit? What is in this photo, and why you put this example in your book?
Yes, sure. Because acrolein, which is one of these advanced lipid oxidation end products, it's interestingly, it's in both cigarette smoke and in heated vegetable oils. And so Martin Greitfeld, a lipid chemist in the United Kingdom, has done a lot of work in this area, and they analyzed all these different edible oils from restaurants. And what he found was that, for example, in a large French fries, the equivalent of a large French fries from McDonald's, that you would get, I think it was about 1.5 milligrams, I think is the number. I may be wrong on that. I can't remember the number for sure, but I think that's right, of acrolein in the vegetable oils.
Yeah.
But you will get, but in average cigarettes, well, let me just put it this way. I think it's, so a typical average cigarette in terms of acrolein dose, you would get about it would take about 16 to 26 cigarettes, I believe it is, to produce that much acrolein, or up to around 98 cigarettes of the lowest acrolein would produce the same amount of acrolein that you would get in a large French fries. I didn't say that very well. So, yeah. But anyway, the point is that you would get, as you know, that consuming the French fries, you're consuming a huge whopping dose of this acrolein, the equivalent of smoking 18 to 26 average cigarettes, or up to almost 100 cigarettes that are low in acrolein.
Yeah.
Maybe that came out better. And this acrolein again will accumulate in your body, and it's extreme toxicant. Well, so acrolein is the primary toxicant that is thought to cause lung cancer in smokers. And acrolein is also present in these oils when you heat them. And for example, back in the 1980s, they had already determined that a large percentage of the women in China that were developing lung cancer had never smoked. And they could not figure this out. What they finally related it to was that they were most likely to be wok cooking with, I think it was safflower oil, but anyway, one of the vegetable oils, maybe it was rapeseed oil, but they were wok cooking with it. So it means that they're heating the oil to very high temperatures, and it vaporizes the oil, and they're breathing it in. And this is also true for people who are working in restaurants where they're cooking, heating the oils at very high temperatures. They're breathing in large amounts of acrolein. Yeah. So it's very much like smoking.
Yeah. So could you just describe the picture of these two boys? Because it was just so striking to see that picture, that one is, we have one little boy who's eating French fries, right?
Right.
Could you describe that picture?
Yeah. So I just put, two pictures of little boys. One who's smoking a cigarette. He must be, 8 or 10 years old. And another boy beside him eating a large plate of French fries, because, we look at as particularly as parents, or almost anyone would look at a little boys who would be smoking, and we would just think that's horrendous. Yeah. It's just so incredibly dangerous. How could you let this happen, that this little boy is smoking? And yet the smoking is not nearly as dangerous as the little boy sitting next to him, who looks like he's 3, and he's got this huge plate of French fries. Yeah. And I said, the little boy who quit smoking, he will be poisoned for no more than, I think it's a year. They've shown that in smokers who stop smoking, a year later, their levels of oxidation in the body have returned to normal. Yeah. And it may be most of that takes place in the first 6 months. I think it might be 6 months. Yeah. But the boy who consumes the French fries, this changes your body fat, and those toxins accumulate in our fat, and he's poisoned for 3 years.
Yeah, and that's related to, isn't it? Because what happens to PUFAs, or linoleic acid, when they enter our body, and these advanced lipid oxidation end products, that they accumulate in our body fat, right?
Right, they accumulate.
And
this is where they're going to set up this pro-oxidative and pro-inflammatory and toxic environment.
Yeah, and isn't it something like that? I think I read somewhere in your work, or I've heard you talk about it before, that, if your diet consists of maybe 10% linoleic acid, it's going to be almost double that in your fat tissue, or was it something like that? The percentage.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So whatever the amount of omega-6 that you consume you've been consuming in your diet for the past 3 years, your body fat will roughly be double that amount. So if you're consuming 10% omega-6 linoleic acid, your body fat linoleic acid will be roughly 20%. Yeah. And so, and by the way, so there's only been, as far as I could find, and I searched for literally for years. I mean, I've been searching through evidence, and I found 4 populations who have had their omega-6 linoleic acid established in their body fat who were not, or maybe I should say, they were not consuming processed foods, they weren't consuming vegetables, and they were consuming an ancestral diet. And that these were studies all done by Ian Pryor, IAN is his Ian, that's his first name, Pryor, Prior, and colleagues back in 1968, 69, I believe it was. So they analyzed the populations in New Zealand and in an island close down there, Puka Puka. Yeah. And they examined the Maori population of New Zealand, and they examined Europeans of New Zealand, and then they examined Puka Pukans of the island of Puka Puka, and also Puka Pukans of the island of Rarotonga. And those are the only 4 populations I've ever found that are completely ancestral, and had their body fat adipose, their adipose or body fat linoleic acid established, and it averaged 2.8%. Yeah. That's where we should be with that's where our body fat linoleic acid would be if we're consuming an ancestral diet, essentially. And let me compare that. So Americans in 1959, our average body fat linoleic acid was 9.1%, right? So it's about 3 times higher than people on ancestral diets, right? Now, we were at 9.1% in 1959, and that year we were at about 19 grams of seed oils per person per day, 19 grams. 2008, Americans, their body fat omega-6 linoleic acid was 21.5%. All right, so it's gone from 9.1% in 1959 to 21.5% in 2008, and again, our omega-6 linoleic acid in our food supply then 11.8%. So again, approximately doubles, right? Yeah. So I've looked at all kinds of populations all around the world. I mean, all westernized populations that are again consuming seed oils, and since about 1990, the average omega-6 in the body fat averages around, I think it's about 14.5%. Yeah. Again, contrast that to the 2.8% people on an ancestral diet. And the main difference is really just vegetable oils. It's all about vegetables. The whole world is just almost every nation in the world that I've found in the last 5 decades, their vegetable oil consumption has been going up, except one, and that's France. That's the only one I've seen where in recent decades their omega-6 linoleic acid has been going down. And so no surprise, obesity going down. Yeah. In France, along with their vegetable oils.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It really is. So I think this is highly relevant for our listeners, is to, probably everyone is thinking now, okay, where do we find seed oils in our food supply today? And you've been talking about this, it's processed foods mainly. And then you touched on, monogastric animals, the fats of monogastric animals that are fed for feed, like chicken, pork, and then also in the egg yolks of chickens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so, if they're corn and soy.
Yeah. So pasture-raised chickens and pork, is that fine, or how is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it may be beneficial, I believe, to try to consume the animals that have consumed their traditional diet.
Yeah.
I think there's benefit to that. I can't really prove that, but I think there may be benefit to having your omega-6 consumption lowered because you're also avoiding the animals that are high in omega-6 and, like lots of nuts and seeds. Mm-hmm. That's not, the big picture, back to the big picture, I think you're going to achieve a massive result just by getting the industrial seed oils out of your diet. That's it. I mean, if you did just one thing, I think you're going to fix 90% or more of potential chronic disease issues just by doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But one thing I don't think everyone is kind of aware of, that, these dangerous compounds, these seed oils, are in absolutely the majority of all kinds of packaged and processed foods. But some foods maybe that, people don't expect, even though they're packaged, for example, baby foods and baby formula.
Yeah.
So, and why is that? Do you know why they put seed oils in baby formula, for example?
Well, it's insanity, but it's just absurd. I mean, Sally Fallon of the Weston A. Price Foundation, she said many years ago that baby formula is the most processed food on the planet. And that is just, isn't that just horrible? But that's what we're doing to our infants and our little toddlers. I mean, the first foods they're getting are seed oils. Well, why? Well, because of this absurd idea that we need to avoid saturated fat. And so they literally, remove the one thing that would be the most beneficial. Like they remove animal fat, remove butter, make sure there's no animal fat in there, no tallow or anything like that in the formula, and they put in seed oils and sugar and refined flour, and then they put artificially put vitamins in there, right? It's just if you look at the list of ingredients on these formulas, particularly, I mean, including the dry formula mixes, it's just insane. There's just this huge long laundry list of mystery ingredients in there. It's not real food, any of it.
Yeah, I know. So because when I've been thinking about this for a long time now, because one thing I hear every now and then from people here in Europe is that, this is maybe not of a big concern in our countries, because it's more in the US that it's, that's what we hear, at least, because, I've heard of in the US, I've heard of black markets for baby formula in the US where people are smuggling formula in from Europe. But I actually don't know if it's so much better here. Just, for example, I picked up baby formula yesterday in the store, and I did some calculations, and it's striking. So, I'm not going to say the name or anything of the brand, but this is a really popular baby formula. It's a dry powder baby formula that you're supposed to blend with water. And it's really, really popular here in Scandinavia, in my home country, in Iceland. It's the brand that's many mothers look at as the more healthy, because it's organic. So I just looked into this a little bit, and it contains the ingredients list is like this. It's organic skimmed milk, and this is the first ingredient. Then they have whey powder from milk. And then the third ingredient is vegetable oils. Yeah. It's palm oil, rapeseed oil, and sunflower oil. And then they have, this list goes on and on. There are so many other things in there. There's fish oil as well, lactose, and then a lot of minerals and vitamins in the end. But so this I did some calculations on this. So in 100 milliliters of a prepared milk, when you've prepared it with and blended it with water, so in 100 milliliters of a prepared milk, we have 3.7 grams of fat. Thereof, 1.5 grams is saturated fats, and then 1.6 grams monounsaturated fats, and then 0.5 grams are PUFAs. And then they even break down the PUFAs. So we have 0.4 grams of LA, or omega-6 linoleic acid, and in 100 milliliters. And then we have ALA, or omega-3, being 0.06, and then arachidonic acid and DHA being 13.2 milligrams each. But so if we follow the guidelines given on the outside of this baby formula, a 1 to 2 week old baby should get 7 to 8 meals of 70 milliliters of this formula, which equals a total of 1.96 to 2.24 grams of linoleic acid per day for that newborn baby. And then for babies 3 to 4 weeks old, it's a little more meals, which equals 2 to 2.8 grams of linoleic acid per day. And for 1 to 2 months old, we have 2.7 to 3.24 grams of linoleic acid per day. And then 3 to 4 months old, we have a total of 3.4 grams of linoleic acid per day. And then 5 to 6 month olds, we have, they should get 4 to 5 meals per day, consisting of 200 milliliters of that milk per meal. So that equals 3.2 to 4 grams of linoleic acid per day. And then 6 months old, they should get a little bit more, 3.76 grams of linoleic acid in their daily milk. And I've checked some other brands as well, and this is not any better there. Actually, there's actually more LA content in another brand that is quite popular here in Scandinavia and in Iceland, where the LA content is 0.555 grams per 100 milliliters, but this brand had 0.4 grams per 100 milliliters. So, and by this point, we've probably also started feeding the baby some ready-made baby food. For example, the most common food to begin with, and what mothers and parents are encouraged to begin with, is porridge. And that is, I also picked that up at the store yesterday. And this one contains, this is a popular brand as well. And in one portion of this porridge for babies from 6 months old, it has 3.4 grams of fats, whereof only 0.7 are saturated. And then it doesn't state how many mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, but it's 2.7 grams per serving coming from monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So then I just did some math here. So in terms of percentage, if we look at, for example, a 5 to 6 month old baby who is only getting baby formula, not being breastfed, only this baby formula, and have not started eating any foods, for example, then the total caloric intake for that baby is about 660 calories per day, whereof 36 calories are coming from linoleic acid, which equals 5.4% of that baby's calories coming from linoleic acid. This is a 5 to 6 month old baby. And you pointed out here earlier that we should be aiming for staying below 2%, right? Or closer to 1.
Yes.
Yeah. It's striking. So we're not exactly maybe giving our kids a good start here.
Yeah, the linoleic acid can be a little bit higher for babies, but even babies probably only need about 1%. So adults only need about 0.5% and probably less. Even 0.35% of their calories as omega-6 linoleic acid. That's an adult, and no more than 0.5%. So babies probably 1%. But again, definitely, no more than 2% is all that's would be necessary. Because again, they will require a little bit higher linoleic acid as they in infancy and as they're growing. But it's more than anything, it's the source of the fat that's so troubling to me, even more than those linoleic acid numbers. It's the source of the fats, and the fact that, you mentioned there's palm, safflower, I think you mentioned, those oils. But again, it's not butter.
But regarding breast milk, because you started talking about that, how is it, isn't this also the case, with breast milk from mothers in Western countries, that our breast milk contains a lot higher amounts of linoleic acid than for those who live on an ancestral diet, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I do not remember those numbers off the top of my head. I've not worked very much, in this area, babies and child in breast milk, but absolutely the breast milk linoleic acid goes up considerably for women who are consuming seed oils or high omega-6 diets. So but even with that, the breast milk would be by far and away that's the best possible thing that an infant can be fed. I mean, I think it's really healthy up to 2 years or beyond if you want. But I think that, and then move the child to an ancestral diet as soon as you can, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
That they start incorporating real natural foods, and not necessarily, they don't have to necessarily be baby foods, that you buy at the store. You start moving your child to natural foods, meat, fruits, vegetables. They can be pureed or whatever, but doing those kinds of foods at home, making your own, that's the way to go. As soon as you can get as soon as the baby can start chewing those things a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And regarding the LA intake of breast milk, I'm just thinking, being a breastfeeding mother myself currently, and for other breastfeeding women who are maybe listening and they want to make a change here, we were talking about, that it takes about 3 years to for us to, when we make a change to remove all of this LA from our body fat stores. Am I not right there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The half-life of omega-6 LA in the body is about 600 to 680 days. So it's roughly 2 years, and you can turn over all of your body fatty acids in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is what one paper showed. It takes a long time to reduce your omega-6 linoleic acid down to ancestral levels. But I tell people, as soon as you get vegetable oils out of your diet, you'll be healthier within hours.
Yeah.
Because the quickest thing to happen is you're getting rid of toxins, you're reducing your inflammation, and you're reducing your oxidation levels quickly. I mean, literally that day. And so in the first days, it's just like quitting smoking or something like that. You're healthier rapidly, and but you may not notice that all of the benefits for up to 3 years. But that's a great goal to have. That you're going to be healthier. You're going to continue to improve your health probably for the next 3 years.
Yeah. But in regards to the breast milk, does it, if someone wants to make a change to their lifestyle and go fully ancestral diet, a breastfeeding mother, does it translate into the LA content of the breast milk right away? Do you know that?
I would think that it would, because one of the things that changes the quickest is the triglycerides in the blood, in the serum. That changes very rapidly. So there's two things that change over time, the most, and that is your adipose or your body fat in terms of the fatty acid profile, and what's in the blood, which would be the triglycerides in the blood. And so that's ultimately what's going to be probably the biggest factor in producing breast milk. It's not going to be the stored fat so much. I'm quite certain, and so I'm quite certain that it would be fairly rapid in terms of making healthier breast milk. Yeah, I think that would happen quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll need to look a little bit more into that because this is really interesting and it makes sense the way you're explaining this. So, yeah. But one thing, again here, that I've heard you talk about before, that there's been found a striking correlation between the LA intake of mothers and then obesity in their children. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how is that? Is that during pregnancy or during breastfeeding or both?
Both, all of that. So that, we have literally an epidemic of obesity. Even in infancy, we're seeing a lot of obesity in the United States, and this is driven by the mother consuming processed foods primarily.
Yeah.
And then whatever the infant is getting right after birth.
Yeah.
So the infant is going to have a higher omega-6 fatty acid if the mother is consuming high seed oil diet during pregnancy. And then the child, and then of course, as we've already talked about, then a lot of children, the next thing, infants, the next thing that happens is they're fed formula.
Yeah.
Of course, that formula is made with seed oils because of this fear that animal fat, saturated fat, is bad. And this is a totally unfounded fear and a totally unfounded claim. So we should never, ever fear that.
Yeah, exactly. And isn't it also just, because when they started making formula or when they are making formula, they're kind of trying to mimic the LA content in the breast milk of mothers, but they're looking at the breast milk of westernized mothers, right? They're not looking at the breast milk of, some mother in a hunter-gatherer population, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And as we've talked about, we know that mothers consuming native, traditional, non-processed food diets have much lower LA in their breast milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, Chris, we have covered so much. We've gone over what seed oils are. We've established that there is an association that it's seed oils that have caused the increase in the development in chronic disease over the past 100 and 120 years. And, we've talked about why they are so bad. We've talked about that we're really generally getting way too much linoleic acid, omega-6, in our diet today, and that it builds up in our tissues, and how much we should actually be consuming in a day. So we've gone over also where the seed oils are in our food supply. So all of this, when you get this big picture, this is just unbelievable. And I really feel like people find this hard to believe. Is that your opinion as well when you talk to someone who isn't, doesn't focus a lot on what's in their diet?
Yeah, what I find is that the people that are not in nutrition circles, they're convinced very rapidly. It seems like they tend to be open. They tend to be open-minded, and that makes sense to them very quickly when they understand that especially the correlational evidence that I talked about early on here in this talk, and they readily seem to adapt to this. To me, it's physicians and even all the way up through nutrition researchers who, especially those who have taken on the low carb agenda and the sugar theorists, I call them. Yeah. And they some of them, they will not change their stance no matter how much evidence you give them. But if that's the case, to me, you're not a scientist. I guess I'm a quasi scientist. I mean, I left medical practice to work on this kind of research, but But again, I'll change my mind today if I see evidence that is contrary to anything that I've believed or written about or promoted before. I don't have any. I don't have any agenda. I'm not tied to any doctrine or theory, and I also don't make a living doing this. I just work at this because I think it's the right thing to do. I left practice to pursue this, and started nonprofit foundations, and I don't have an agenda. I don't care what the answers are. I just want to know what the truth is and bring the truth to the people as much as I can.
Yeah.
So and if I'm learning today, I'm learning every day, more about all of this, and I just try to bring that evidence forward and spread the knowledge.
Yeah, and that's why I think people like you are the best people to actually be researching this in nutrition, because I find it really difficult, at least talking to nutritionists, because they will wave their degree in my face and so but just before we wrap this up, what can you tell me about then how, just a take-home message, how to limit our LA intake? You touched on this a little bit here, so but just what foods should we eat and what should we not eat?
So I think the goal is to get rid of processed food. And processed food, again, is refined flour, refined sugars, and vegetable oils. I do think that we need to try to reduce the refined ingredients. And the way to do that is basically, it's not easy, but it's mostly prepare your own food and be very cautious when you're eating out. I would just say, I say blanket, blanketly across the, your entire diet. Just try to eliminate vegetable oils. It's not that hard when you just know the big picture. It does take vigilance. You have to be cautious about where you get your products, but all processed foods are made with vegetable oils, pretty much. They're not made with animal fats, lard, butter, and beef tallow. So prepare your own food as much as possible, and just know that you need to keep the vegetable oils out, and you're 90% of the way there, just in one fell swoop.
Exactly.
People they might, if they want to learn this, in greater detail, like you have. My latest book is called The Ancestral Diet Revolution, and it's available. I don't know where all people are getting it in Europe, but
it's the same as in the US. We buy on Amazon, then.
Okay. I figured most of you are getting it on Amazon there too. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, it's called. And we do have a website, a couple of websites I might mention. Ancestral Health Foundation, and that's at ancestralhealthfoundation.org. And I have a website myself, Chris Knobbe, that's ChrisKnobbe, chrisknobbe.com. And we also have a website for macular degeneration called Cure AMD Foundation, and that's at cureamd.org. People can come there and sign up for our newsletter. And I have a PDF that they can download from the Ancestral Health Foundation or from my site. And that PDF is a synopsis of this latest book. And it's got information that's not available in the book too, but they can sign up and get that. So those are some other ways to get more information about this.
Yeah, and I'll link to all of your websites in my show notes. I'll do that so people can find out more about your work if they want to really dive in. And like you said, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, your newest book, it's really inspiring, and not only for people. I just need to say that this not only for people of health background or medical background or anything like that. My husband is a pilot, and he has read this book several times, and I've probably read it 3 or 4 times because, I'm always reading sections here and there again and again, because it's so much information, and it's always something new that I'm learning whenever I read something again. So I really recommend this book. But just before we wrap it up here, Chris, I really want to ask everyone that comes onto my show how their diet is. So how is your diet, Chris? What do you eat in a day? How does a typical day of eating look for you?
Well, most of the time over the last decade, it's been what most people would consider a pretty normal diet. I'm sort of animal based, but I don't eat. That's not the bulk of my calories. But I eat grass-fed beef, ancestrally raised chicken, and some pork, and wild-caught fish. I eat lots of fruits and vegetables, potatoes, including potatoes, rice. I love plantains cooked in butter. I'm not that big of a fan of bananas, but anyway, fruits and vegetables, I think, are, for most people, they're very, very important, and I think they're really quite essential. I think that we are omnivores. I think for most all of us, our diets need to be of plant and animal origin. So I think the extremes are not the best for most people. In other words, being carnivore, all meat, all animal diet, 100%. I don't think that's for most people the best way to go. I'm not saying that some people don't have to resort to that to get healthy. That does seem to be true. I also don't think at the other extreme that we should be vegan. We need animal meats and animal products, or maybe I should say animal products. It could even just be butter and eggs, for example, to be healthy, to get our fat soluble vitamins. But that's kind of where. So my diet is it has been typically very, very broad over the last number of years. If people saw how I eat, it would look normal. At least in America. I mean, all kinds of ethnic foods, but again, and I don't pay that much attention to my macronutrient ratios. And I don't worry that much about the protein level and all those kind of things that people do. I mostly just make sure I'm not consuming any of the processed food ingredients for the most part.
Yeah, that's absolutely the best way. Best place to start. It's the processed foods and vegetable oils, to get rid of that from our diet. And you mentioned a little bit here, it's that you probably don't believe that it's, one or the other extreme, only animal products or only plant-based, for example. And I just have to mention, because I mentioned this in the beginning, that, that I have been a vegan and I have never been as sick in my whole life as when I was then. And there was a huge difference when I went from completely vegan to then a vegetarian or ovo-lacto-vegetarian, when I started eating eggs, butter, like you said, and then incorporated some milk. These things, it's night and day. At least for me, it really, it made a huge difference. But then, things I wasn't as healthy as I had been before and how I wanted to be. So, going over to mostly animal-based, like you're talking about now, and really focusing on where your food is coming from, where your food sources are coming from. That's kind of been I hit the nail on the head there, at least for me and my health.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. Absolutely. I've known lots of vegans who got very sick, on that diet, and then, moved over to more of an animal, with an animal base in their diet.
Yeah.
And not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, because now I don't think maybe many people know kind of what animal based means, but some people who maybe know about Paul Saladino and what he stands for. He talks about animal-based being, you eat mostly red meat, eggs, whole raw milk, right? And then his carb sources are mostly fruits and honey and milk, and that's kind of like what I do now. And then also some, like you said, potatoes and rice every now and then. But the lean meats, I kind of don't eat them here because I find it really difficult to find and buy pasture raised, like you're talking about chicken and pork. Mm-hmm. So at least here, but yeah, I haven't done a lot of research about, trying to find these, but, beef and lamb, especially Icelandic lamb, it's really, really good. So we're thriving here now, and my kids are, over the moon. My boys are over the moon of, there's no lentils anymore, and, black bean tacos and so forth. They get meat in their diet.
Right. I'm sure they love it.
Yeah. So for the past years, they've just been thriving, and my 9-year-old, he's growing like crazy. He's getting so muscular and strong, and he's, starting to drink a lot of milk, and we drink for the most part raw milk here as well, where we buy from directly from a farm. And so, we've seen a lot of good change in everyone in the family.
Yeah, it's just, I'm always astonished at what diet can do for your health. Either what direction, how great how healthy you can be with an ancestral diet, and how incredibly unhealthy. Death being the ultimate extreme that comes from processed food laden diets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's when I thought I was the most healthy. That's when I was the most sick, actually, I see now. But I thought I was doing everything right. I was eating. Right. I'm probably not just eating enough vegetables. I just need to eat more and more vegetables. And, it's this vegetable oils and all of these, plant-based milks and plant-based yogurts. These are really, really processed foods. So being a vegan and vegetarian today, it's so much processed foods there. It's not just eating fruits and vegetables. It's a lot of processed foods. So at least for me, that did not work well.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's the case for vegans in general. They can tolerate it for a few years, maybe 5 years even, but then, they're going to run out of fat-soluble vitamins, run really low, and they're just going to start developing all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
And it's the same on the other end, the other extreme. You can get it the same way with carnivore. I see people get really sick on carnivore because on carnivore, without any plants in your diet, it's really hard to get enough of many minerals, particularly calcium, magnesium, potassium, and copper. It's really hard to get those without fruits and vegetables in your diet.
Yeah.
But to get those in sufficient quantity, that is.
Yeah. Yeah, so often, it kind of doesn't matter what diet or what pattern of, what diet you go on. It's, all the diets have the same thing that they eliminate for the most part, at least in the beginning, is the processed foods. So it kind of doesn't matter what kind of diet you change to or convert to, you're going to feel amazing in the beginning. So then you think, oh my God, yes, it's the vegan diet or vegetarian diet or the carnivore diet or the low carb or the keto or whatever it is. That's so amazing. But the biggest factor that people have been changing or taking out of their diet is the processed foods with all the seed oils.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on to my podcast, Chris. Is there anything you want to mention here before we wrap up? Like I said, I will link to your websites in the show notes, but is there anything that you want to mention here?
No, I just want to thank you, Ragna, for having me on, and I just want to say it's been an honor and a pleasure. It's fun to talk to you, and I hope I hope you can spread this message along with us far and wide, because the more people we reach, the more people we rescue from declining health. So that's what I'm in this for, and I know you're in this for the same reason. So I applaud you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I just want to thank you for your work, Chris, and I really appreciated our talk. And I'm going to continue spreading the word. And I feel like, I'm reaching out to moms, and it's not only themselves that are going to be affected. They are kind of the head of the family when it often comes to diet. So they are going to make a lot of the dietary decisions for the family. So my hope is also to, help contribute to better health in the upcoming generations. So I'll continue spreading the word together with you.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Ragna. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you found this interesting and learned something new. Now, I just want to make it absolutely clear that the purpose of this talk is not in any way, shape, or form intended to mom shame or parent shame anyone, not at all. It's simply to bring awareness to this, because I think this is just so hidden in our community. It's a real hidden danger that is right under our noses. It's in our everyday food supply, and it's in the foods that we're feeding our kids. And in many cases from the day they're born. So please do not take anything here as criticism. I'm simply raising awareness to this and helping getting the message out there. And you can do that too by sharing this episode with every mom or parent that you know, with a friend, with your family or colleagues. Help us spread the message, keep learning, keep moving, and stay healthy. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you're looking for more information or want to check out any studies I reference, head on to my website, babyletsmove.com. You can also join me for a workout through my app called Baby Let's Move, available in both App Store and Google Play. And don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and YouTube for even more content. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider giving it a 5-star rating or a like and share it with a friend. It really helps me reach more amazing listeners like you. Until next time, keep moving and stay healthy.